The moment my 17-year-old niece deliberately threw her drink across my birthday outfit, laughter echoed around the table. My own mother smiled, as though it were nothing more than an amusing joke. My sister didn't even bother to apologize or tell her daughter she had crossed a line. Then my niece looked directly into my eyes with a smug expression and calmly said, "Now you look as cheap as you really are." For several long seconds, the entire restaurant fell silent. Every person at that table waited for me to burst into tears, defend myself, or make a scene in front of everyone. But I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I simply smiled. They mistook my silence for weakness, completely unaware that everything had already changed. None of them knew what I had discovered earlier that morning. They had absolutely no idea that the credit card my sister had been using for years to fund her luxurious lifestyle was actually connected to me. While they continued celebrating my humiliation that evening, convinced they had won, I quietly stepped away, made one phone call, and set events in motion that would completely transform all of our lives. The following morning, at exactly 7:50 a.m., my niece woke up to a reality she never imagined possible. Before we continue, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy powerful family stories filled with unexpected twists. And I'm genuinely curious, where are you watching from today? Leave the name of your country in the comments below. I always enjoy seeing just how far these stories travel across the world. Now, let's get into today's story. My name is Olivia Carter. I'm 29 years old, and I work as a marketing designer in Seattle, Washington. For as long as I can remember, I was the person everyone in my family called whenever life became inconvenient. If someone needed money to cover an unexpected expense, they called me. If there was a bill they couldn't afford, I found a way to help. If someone created a problem they didn't want to deal with, I was expected to fix it without asking questions. I was always available, always dependable, and always willing to sacrifice my own comfort to make life easier for everyone else. For years, I convinced myself that this was simply what being part of a family meant. I believed love was measured by how much you were willing to give, even if nobody ever gave the same kindness back to you. Growing up, I truly believed that being responsible was something to be proud of. I thought that if I kept showing up, kept forgiving people, and stayed patient through every disappointment, eventually my family would appreciate everything I had done for them. I imagined there would come a day when they would finally recognize my loyalty and see my value. Instead, the opposite happened. The more dependable I became, the more invisible I seemed. My kindness slowly stopped being appreciated and became something they simply expected from me. My older sister, Jessica, had always been the favorite child in our family. She had an outgoing personality that naturally drew attention wherever she went. My mother loved telling stories about Jessica's accomplishments, her confidence, and how extraordinary she believed her oldest daughter was. Every family gathering seemed to revolve around Jessica in one way or another. I, on the other hand, was completely different. I was the quiet daughter who focused on work, avoided unnecessary drama, and solved my own problems without asking anyone for help. Nobody described me as special. Nobody praised my sacrifices or celebrated the countless things I quietly did behind the scenes. Instead, everyone simply expected more from me because they assumed I would always manage somehow. Jessica's daughter, Emma, grew up absorbing that exact same attitude. She was intelligent, confident, and incredibly charming whenever it benefited her. She knew exactly how to make people laugh, how to impress adults, and how to convince others she was innocent whenever she crossed a line. Unfortunately, she also learned very early in life that almost nobody would ever hold her accountable for her behavior. Whenever Emma said something rude, people laughed and dismissed it as teenage honesty. Whenever she insulted someone or behaved disrespectfully, everyone excused it by saying she was young and would eventually mature. But if I ever reacted or defended myself, I was immediately told that I was being overly sensitive or taking things too personally. Over the years, I quietly became Jessica's safety net. Whenever she fell behind on payments, I found a way to help. Whenever unexpected expenses appeared, I covered them without making a fuss. I never announced my sacrifices to anyone, and I certainly never asked for recognition. I genuinely believed that helping my sister was simply what a loving family member should do. Every favor felt like another opportunity to prove my loyalty, and every sacrifice seemed worthwhile if it meant keeping the peace within the family. But somewhere along the way, something changed. My generosity stopped being viewed as an act of kindness and slowly became an obligation. Nobody thanked me anymore because they simply expected me to keep giving. My time, my money, and my emotional energy were treated as resources everyone else had unlimited access to. I had unknowingly trained the people closest to me to believe that no matter how poorly they treated me, I would always remain available whenever they needed something. That realization was one of the reasons I wanted my 29th birthday to be different. For the first time in years, I decided to celebrate myself instead of spending the day making everyone else comfortable. I bought a beautiful outfit that made me feel confident every time I looked at it. I reserved a table at my favorite restaurant, selected a place that had always made me feel relaxed, and invited the people I believed mattered most in my life. Standing in front of my bedroom mirror before leaving home, I remember smiling at my reflection. I felt proud of how far I had come despite every challenge. I looked at myself and thought that perhaps this year would mark a fresh beginning. What I didn't know was that by the end of that evening, the dress I had been so excited to wear would become a painful reminder of everything that had been wrong with my family for years. More importantly, it would become the final reason I stopped allowing them to take advantage of my kindness. When I arrived at the restaurant, I genuinely believed I was about to enjoy one of the happiest evenings I'd had in years. The table had been decorated with elegant candles, fresh flowers, and a birthday card waiting beside my plate. Warm lighting filled the room while soft music played quietly in the background. Around us, families laughed, friends celebrated special occasions, and for a brief moment I allowed myself to believe that this birthday might finally be different from all the others. As I looked around the table at my family, hope quietly settled into my heart. Maybe people really could change. Maybe this birthday wouldn't become another reminder that I was always the one giving while everyone else simply took. Maybe just this once, I could relax and enjoy being celebrated. Unfortunately, those hopes began disappearing within the first half hour. Jessica barely asked me a single question about my life or my work. Instead, nearly every conversation somehow returned to Emma. My mother proudly talked about Emma's latest grades, how popular she had become at school, and how everyone seemed to adore her. Emma barely participated in the conversation. She spent most of the evening scrolling through her phone, occasionally glancing at me with a smile that never felt warm or sincere. There was something about the way she looked at me that made me feel as though she were silently judging everything I did. Then her eyes settled on my birthday dress. She looked me up and down before asking, "Is that really what you decided to wear for your birthday?" The entire table became noticeably quieter. Hoping she was only teasing me, I forced a small laugh and replied, "I actually like it." Emma slowly tilted her head, her smile growing even wider. "It's just," she said casually, "I thought you'd wear something nicer. You always talk about how well you're doing." I felt my face grow warm with embarrassment, but I refused to react. Years of experience had taught me how to swallow painful comments without letting anyone see how deeply they affected me. Rather than respond, I quickly changed the subject and tried my best to enjoy what remained of the evening. A few minutes later, our waiter returned carrying everyone's drinks. I was in the middle of speaking with my mother when, without warning, something icy splashed across my chest. The sudden shock stole my breath for a second. I looked down in confusion and watched dark liquid spread across my beautiful birthday outfit, leaving large stains that ruined the fabric almost instantly. Time seemed to freeze. The conversations around us stopped. The laughter from nearby tables faded into the background. I slowly lifted my eyes, expecting anyone, to react with horror. I expected my sister to discipline her daughter. I expected my mother to express concern. I expected Emma to apologize for what had obviously happened. Instead, Emma simply stared at me. Then she smiled. "Oh my gosh," she said with complete satisfaction. "Now you look as cheap as you really are." I couldn't believe the words that had just come out of her mouth. My own 17-year-old niece had humiliated me in front of everyone on my birthday without a single ounce of regret. But as painful as her insult was, what happened immediately afterward hurt even more. My mother looked at my stained dress, then glanced at Emma, and instead of expressing disappointment, she laughed. It wasn't an awkward laugh or one meant to ease the tension. It was genuine amusement, as though watching me being humiliated was somehow entertaining. "Olivia, don't make such a big deal out of it," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. She was only joking. Her words landed harder than the drink ever could. My sister, Jessica, didn't apologize either. She simply shrugged her shoulders and said, "You know how Emma is." There was no concern in her voice, no embarrassment, and certainly no attempt to hold her daughter accountable. In that single moment, something deep inside me quietly shifted. It wasn't really about the ruined dress anymore. It wasn't about the spilled drink or the cruel comment. It was about finally understanding that the people sitting across from me felt completely comfortable hurting me because they believed I would always forgive them, no matter what they did. I slowly looked around the table, taking in every familiar face. The people I had spent years sacrificing for couldn't even pretend to care that I was hurting. I took a slow, steady breath and smiled, not because I was okay, but because for the first time in my life, I knew exactly what I needed to do next. There was nothing left to argue about. No speech I could give would suddenly make them understand how deeply they had wounded me. Quietly, I stood up from my chair, picked up my purse, wished no one good night, and walked away from my own birthday dinner. Nobody tried to stop me. Nobody followed me outside. As I walked through the restaurant and into the cool evening air, I realized I wasn't leaving because I was weak. I was leaving because I had finally grown tired of pretending that this treatment was acceptable. When I arrived home later that night, I expected the emotions to overwhelm me. I thought I would cry the way I always had after painful family gatherings. Surprisingly, the tears never came. That realization shocked me more than anything else. Just a few years earlier, something like this would have shattered me emotionally. I would have spent hours replaying every conversation in my head, wondering what I had done wrong, searching for ways to repair relationships that I hadn't broken. I would have blamed myself, convinced that if I had only been kinder, more patient, or more understanding, everything could have been different. But that night felt completely different. I stood quietly in my bedroom, staring at the stained birthday dress draped over the back of a chair, and a painful truth finally became impossible to ignore. I wasn't heartbroken because someone had thrown a drink on my clothes. I was heartbroken because I had finally accepted something I had been refusing to see for years. My family did not love me the way I loved them. To me, they were the people I would always protect, support, and sacrifice for without hesitation. To them, I had become a resource. I was the dependable person they called whenever life became difficult. I was the one expected to solve problems, pay unexpected bills, and rescue them whenever they found themselves in trouble. My generosity had become so predictable that nobody even considered it a favor anymore. They simply assumed I would always be there, asking for nothing in return. The hardest part of that realization was admitting that I had allowed this pattern to continue for far too long. For years, I had quietly helped Jessica in ways almost nobody knew about. When she lost her job and struggled to keep up with rent, I covered several months of payments without ever mentioning it to anyone. When Emma needed expensive school supplies, extracurricular activity fees, and special programs that Jessica couldn't afford, I stepped in without hesitation because I wanted my niece to have every opportunity possible. When Jessica's car suddenly needed major repairs, I paid the mechanic's bill because she told me she was going through a difficult period and didn't know what else to do. I never told my mother about any of it. I never shared those sacrifices with friends or coworkers. I never expected gratitude, praise, or public recognition. I genuinely believed that helping family was simply the right thing to do. But somewhere over the years, kindness quietly transformed into obligation. Jessica stopped asking whether she could borrow money. She stopped feeling uncomfortable accepting my help. Instead, she gradually began assuming I would take care of whatever problem appeared next. Looking back, the most disturbing part was realizing how normal it had all become. Neither of us questioned the arrangement anymore because I had unknowingly trained everyone to believe my support had no limits. Years earlier, during one of Jessica's most difficult financial periods, I had opened a separate credit account and given her permission to use it strictly for emergencies. At the time, it seemed like the responsible thing to do. I wanted my sister to have a safety net in case something unexpected happened. I imagined it would help her get back on her feet until life stabilized again. But little by little, that emergency account stopped being used for genuine emergencies. Instead, it quietly became part of her everyday lifestyle. The statement slowly filled with restaurant bills, shopping trips, expensive clothing, beauty appointments, luxury purchases, vacations, and countless other expenses that had absolutely nothing to do with financial hardship. Every month I noticed the charges, and every month I convinced myself not to say anything. Whenever I considered confronting Jessica, I immediately worried that it would create unnecessary family drama. So I stayed silent, telling myself it wasn't worth damaging our relationship over money. That silence continued until my birthday. It continued until my niece looked directly into my eyes and insulted me without hesitation. It continued until my own mother defended her, instead of defending me. That night, sitting alone in my apartment with the house completely quiet, I opened the account statement once again. This time, however, I wasn't looking at it through the eyes of a loving sister trying to justify someone else's behavior. I was looking at it through the eyes of a woman who had finally decided to respect herself. Every unnecessary purchase, every expensive dinner, and every luxury expense reminded me how little my sacrifices had been appreciated. Instead of making me angry, the statement brought an unexpected sense of clarity. I realized I wasn't trying to punish Jessica, seek revenge, or hurt my family. I simply refused to continue financing the lives of people who treated me as though I didn't matter. Before going to bed that night, I made a decision that would quietly change everything. The following morning, I woke up earlier than usual. For several minutes, I simply lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying everything that had happened the night before. A small part of me still hoped I would discover it had all been some terrible dream. I wanted to believe the laughter, the cruel words, and the humiliation had never really happened. But reality quickly settled in. Every painful memory was real. Emma's insult was real. My mother's laughter was real. Jessica's complete lack of concern was real. None of it could be undone. I walked into my home office, turned on my laptop, and opened the credit account one final time. My hands rested on the keyboard for several moments as I thought about everything that had led me to this point. For years, I had feared making this decision. Deep down, I worried that saying no would make me a selfish sister. I worried that establishing healthy boundaries would somehow make me the villain in my family story. But then I asked myself one simple question that changed everything. If I stopped helping tomorrow, would they still love me the same way? The answer came almost immediately. Deep inside, I had known it for years. Without hesitation, I removed Jessica's access to the credit account. There was no dramatic confrontation, no emotional speech, and no long message listing every sacrifice I had made over the years. I didn't insult her or demand an apology. I simply made the necessary change and sent one short text message. Jessica, I think it's time you start handling your own responsibilities. I won't be able to continue covering your expenses anymore. That was all I wrote. Less than 5 minutes later, my phone lit up with her name. Jessica was calling. I watched the screen ring once, then again, then a third time. For the first time in years, I didn't immediately rush to solve someone else's crisis. I simply sat there, looking at the phone, allowing it to ring while I enjoyed a feeling I hadn't experienced in a very long time, the freedom to choose myself. Eventually, after several missed calls, I answered. Are you serious? Jessica demanded before I even had the chance to say hello. Her voice wasn't filled with sadness. It wasn't hurt. It certainly wasn't apologetic. She sounded furious. She accused me of being dramatic. According to Jessica, I was destroying our relationship over nothing more than a harmless joke Emma had made at dinner. It was just a joke, she repeated, as though those 4 words erased everything that had happened. Hearing her call it a joke hurt more than I expected, because that had always been their excuse whenever I was the one being humiliated. Whenever someone embarrassed me, insulted me, or dismissed my feelings, it was always brushed aside with the same explanation. They expected me to smile, let it go, and pretend nothing had happened. Somehow, my pain was never taken seriously. It was always my reaction that became the problem. Keeping my voice calm, I told Jessica that this wasn't really about one evening or one cruel comment. It was about years of feeling invisible, years of being disrespected while still being expected to rescue everyone whenever they needed something. I explained that I had reached a point where I could no longer ignore the pattern. Instead of listening, Jessica laughed softly and said, "Wow, Olivia, I never thought you could be this cold." For a brief second, I almost laughed myself. Cold? The people who had ignored my feelings for years were now shocked, because I had finally chosen to protect my own. The irony was almost unbelievable. They had mistaken my kindness for endless obligation, and now that I had drawn one simple boundary, I was suddenly the selfish one. Not long after I ended the call, my mother phoned me as well. Her tone was firm, carrying the familiar disappointment I had heard countless times before. She told me I was embarrassing the family and creating unnecessary conflict. Then she reminded me that family was supposed to support one another, as though repeating those words somehow justified everything that had happened. For years, I had swallowed my thoughts during conversations like these. I had stayed quiet to avoid arguments, convinced that keeping the peace was more important than expressing my own pain. But this time, I refused to stay silent. "Supporting someone doesn't mean allowing them to hurt you," I said calmly. There was complete silence on the other end of the line. For once, nobody had a response. No excuses. No lectures. No attempts to twist my words. That quiet moment revealed something I had never fully understood before. By setting healthy boundaries, I wasn't losing my family. I was finally rediscovering myself after years of putting everyone else's needs before my own. The next morning, I woke up expecting another uncomfortable day filled with tension and silence. I assumed Jessica would ignore me for a while, and I imagined my mother would send a few disappointed messages before eventually letting the situation fade away. I thought everyone simply needed time to calm down. I couldn't have been more wrong. At exactly 7:50 that morning, my phone began ringing. First it was Jessica, then my mother, then Jessica again. Watching their names repeatedly appear on my screen, I immediately sensed that something significant had happened. The urgency in their calls felt completely different from the anger they had shown the previous night. When I finally answered, Jessica didn't even give me the chance to say hello. "Olivia, what did you do?" she shouted. Her voice had changed completely. The confidence she carried at the restaurant was gone. The arrogance had disappeared. For the first time in a very long time, I heard genuine panic. She quickly explained what had happened. Emma had gone out that morning with plans to meet her friends. Like always, she confidently reached for the credit card connected to the account I had provided years earlier. She expected the payment to go through without a second thought. Instead, the transaction was declined. She tried again. It was declined again. Only then did Jessica realize I hadn't been making empty threats the night before. I had already removed her access. Immediately, she began blaming me. She accused me of humiliating Emma in public. She insisted people would assume their family was having financial problems. She claimed I had no idea how much embarrassment and damage I had caused them in just one morning. I listened quietly without interrupting. What Jessica described as damage wasn't cruelty. It wasn't punishment. It was simply the first moment in years that they were forced to experience the natural consequences of relying on someone else's generosity. For so long, I had protected them from every difficult situation. Before bills became overdue, I paid them. Before financial problems became crises, I stepped in and solved them. Before anyone else even noticed something was wrong, I quietly fixed it behind the scenes. Looking back, I realized every rescue had made them more dependent on me instead of more responsible. Every time I removed the consequences of their choices, I unintentionally encouraged them to expect even more from me. And every time they disrespected me without consequences, They became increasingly confident that I would never leave. That cycle ended the moment I chose myself. Jessica, I said calmly, I didn't take anything away from you. I simply stopped providing something that was never guaranteed. She didn't respond immediately. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she quietly said something I knew I would remember for the rest of my life. So, you're really choosing yourself over your family? Her question echoed through the room after the call became silent. I slowly looked around my apartment, taking in the peaceful home I had built through years of hard work. Everything around me represented sacrifices I had made, without asking anyone else for help. Suddenly, her question sounded almost absurd. For years, I had chosen them. I had chosen their financial emergencies over my own savings. I had chosen their comfort over my peace of mind. I had chosen their happiness over my own. I had chosen their needs, their problems, and their convenience countless times without expecting anything in return. Yet somehow, almost nobody noticed when I was the one quietly suffering. So I answered honestly, yes, Jessica. For once in my life, I am choosing myself. Silence filled the line once again. This silence felt different. It wasn't the silence of understanding. It was the silence of people realizing they no longer had control over someone they had taken for granted. At that moment, I finally understood something that had been hidden from me for years. They weren't truly angry because I had hurt them. They were angry because I had stopped allowing them to hurt me. Several days after my birthday, my mother contacted me again. This time, instead of another phone call filled with criticism, she asked if I would meet her and Jessica in person. My first instinct was to refuse. Too many conversations with them had followed the exact same pattern. Somehow, no matter what happened, I always ended up apologizing. I became the one explaining why my feelings had been hurt, while they defended the behavior that caused the pain in the first place. I was always expected to restore the peace, regardless of who had broken it. This time, however, I accepted the invitation. Not because I expected an apology, not because I believed they would suddenly understand everything. I agreed because I wanted, perhaps for the first time in my life, to speak honestly without minimizing my own feelings. We met at a quiet little cafe not far from my mother's house. The atmosphere was calm, but the tension between us was impossible to ignore. Jessica looked exhausted, as though the past few days had been far more stressful than she expected. My mother looked disappointed, not remorseful, not sympathetic, simply disappointed, as though I had violated an unwritten family rule by refusing to continue sacrificing myself. She was the first to speak. I still don't understand why you're making such a huge issue out of one little incident, she said. Hearing those words, I realized something important. Even after everything that had happened, they still didn't understand. Taking a slow breath, I calmly began telling them the truth I had carried inside me for years. It was never just about the drink. I reminded them of every time I had shown up without being asked twice, every bill I had quietly paid, every emergency I had solved before anyone else even noticed, every sacrifice I had made while pretending I didn't mind because I believed that was what family was supposed to do. I spoke about the countless moments I ignored my own feelings just to keep everyone else comfortable. Then I looked directly at Jessica. I was your sister, I said quietly, not your backup plan. The cafe became completely silent. For the first time, neither my mother nor Jessica interrupted me. Neither of them tried to defend themselves. Neither of them laughed. I continued speaking, my voice steady despite the emotions I'd carried for so many years. I'm not here because I want revenge, I said. I'm here because I spent years trying to earn love from people who should have given it to me freely. I kept believing that if I sacrificed enough, worked hard enough, and forgave enough, one day I'd finally feel valued. Instead, I only became easier to take for granted. As those words settled between us, my mother slowly lowered her eyes, unable to meet my gaze. Jessica didn't say another word after that. She simply sat there in silence, staring down at the table as though she didn't know how to respond. My mother remained quiet as well, avoiding my eyes. I don't know whether either of them truly understood everything I had said that afternoon. maybe they didn't. Maybe they still believed I was overreacting. But by the time I walked out of that cafe, something much more important had happened. I finally understood myself. I realized that protecting my own peace wasn't selfish, heartless, or cruel. It was necessary. After years of sacrificing my happiness for people who rarely considered my feelings, I finally understood that choosing yourself isn't an act of betrayal. Sometimes, it's the only way to survive. And often, the hardest person to choose is yourself because you've spent so many years believing everyone else's needs should come first. After that conversation, my relationship with my family was never quite the same. At first, that reality felt strange. There were fewer phone calls, fewer invitations, and fewer expectations placed on my shoulders. But instead of trying to force everything back to the way it had been, I allowed things to change. For years, I had convinced myself that if I gave enough of my time, enough of my money, and enough of my patience, people would eventually recognize my value. I believed that endless sacrifice would one day earn me the love and appreciation I had always wanted. Instead, I learned one of the most important lessons of my life. You cannot force someone to value you simply by constantly proving your worth. No amount of giving will make someone appreciate what they have already decided to take for granted. Real respect begins the moment you start respecting yourself. The months that followed weren't always easy. Healing rarely happens overnight, and there were days when I questioned every decision I had made. Sometimes I wondered whether I had been too harsh. Other times I caught myself thinking that maybe I should have stayed quiet, ignored the insults, and gone back to being the version of myself everyone expected. After all, that would have been easier. It would have avoided conflict. It would have restored the familiar routines I had lived with for years. But every time those doubts appeared, I remembered exactly how I had felt sitting at that birthday table. I remembered the cold drink soaking through my dress. I remembered Emma's cruel smile. I remembered my mother's laughter. I remembered Jessica's complete refusal to defend me. Most of all, I remembered how alone I had felt while sitting in a room full of people who were supposed to love me. Those memories reminded me why I could never go back. Returning to the person I used to be wouldn't have been kindness. It would have been another form of abandoning myself. I had spent too many years ignoring my own pain just to keep everyone else comfortable. I refused to do that ever again. Instead of focusing on fixing relationships that only existed because of my sacrifices, I finally started investing in my own life. I traveled to places I had always wanted to visit but had postponed because someone else needed my help. I spent more time with friends who genuinely cared about me, people who respected my boundaries and appreciated my presence without expecting anything in return. I poured my energy into my career, taking on new opportunities and challenging myself professionally. Little by little, I built a future that wasn't dependent on anyone else's approval or validation. For the first time in a very long time, my happiness belonged to me instead of being tied to whether someone else was pleased with me. As the months passed, setting boundaries gradually became less frightening. What once felt uncomfortable slowly became natural. I learned that saying no wasn't an act of cruelty. It wasn't selfishness or rejection. It was honesty. It was acknowledging that my time, energy, and emotional well-being mattered just as much as anyone else's. Every boundary I set became another reminder that I deserved the same kindness I had spent years giving so freely to everyone around me. My relationship with Jessica eventually settled into something different. We weren't especially close anymore, but strangely enough, it became healthier than it had ever been before. There were no longer endless expectations, hidden resentments, or silent obligations hanging between us. We stopped pretending that our relationship was built on mutual respect when, for years, it had actually been built on guilt and dependence. The distance between us wasn't a punishment. It was simply honesty replacing illusion. Over time, even my mother began to understand that I was no longer the quiet daughter who would stay silent simply to keep everyone else comfortable. She slowly realized that I wasn't refusing to help because I had stopped loving my family. I was refusing to continue a pattern that had been hurting me for years. Our relationship wasn't perfect, and perhaps it never would be, but at least it was finally built on clearer expectations instead of silent sacrifice. Looking back now, I no longer think my 29th birthday was ruined. In many ways, it became the most important birthday of my life. It was the day I finally stopped accepting less than I deserved. It was the day I stopped confusing endless sacrifice with love. It was the day I realized that kindness should never require abandoning yourself. That painful evening gave me something far more valuable than a perfect celebration. It gave me the courage to reclaim my self-respect and build a life where I no longer measured my worth by how much I could do for other people. Because family isn't defined only by shared blood or the name written on your family tree. Family is made up of the people who respect your boundaries, support your dreams, celebrate your successes, and stand beside you without making you earn their love through constant sacrifice. Real love doesn't demand that you lose yourself to keep someone else happy. And sometimes, the bravest decision you'll ever make is choosing yourself. Because the moment you finally choose yourself with honesty, courage, and self-respect is often the very moment you begin building the life you are always meant to live.